intimate family group, and our lives, they intersect with what we study. Another form of intersectionality. Okay, so why don't we begin? We're almost wrapped up. We've got two more chapters after this to go, and where we left off was a kind of an ending of the book of Joshua, where everything was done, and they brought everybody together, and they declared, after all these years, uh, Joshua is no longer with us, but uh, there's new leaders, and they part ways in Shiloh, or Shiloh in Hebrew, where the tabernacle is resting, and that has been the ritual center, and even the spiritual center, maybe even the political center, if there's such a thing as you could talk about it, during these last many chapters with the wars in different places. Joshua was at Shiloh. And that's in the background of our story today. It's an interesting story. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever studied it before. Because I've never studied, I don't remember studying Joshua from the beginning to the end before. And but you get to know different stories, different traditions. And this was actually a new one for me. So that's good. Um, and then I think we'll wind this up in a few weeks, and maybe we'll take a few weeks off, and we'll decide exactly what we're going to do going forward. Always happy to get your suggestions. Okay, Roberta, would you like to read the first section?
Sure. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have observed all that Moses, the servant of God, commanded you, and have obeyed me in everything that I commanded you. You have not forsaken your kindred through the long years down to this day, but have faithfully observed the instruction of the eternal your God. Now the eternal your God has given you your kindred rest, as God promised them. Therefore, turn and go to your homes, to the land of your holdings, beyond the Jordan that Moses, the servant of God, assigned to you. But be very careful to fulfill the instruction and the teachings that Moses, the servant of God, enjoined upon you, to love the eternal God, your God, to walk in godly ways, to keep the commandments, and to hold fast to God, and to render service with all your heart and soul." Then Joshua blessed them and dismissed them, and they went to their homes.
Right. I said something rather silly before. I said Joshua is no longer with us, and that's because I was concentrating on the second half of the story. But of course, he's there. He's in the background. This story brings us back to the beginning of the book of Joshua, and even before that in Numbers. The beginning of the book of Joshua talks about how those 2.5 tribes, and somebody asked last time, I think it was, how could you have a half of a tribe? I think, Roberta, you asked that. It's because the tribe of Manasseh, it was split into two, half on one side of the Jordan River, half on the other side of the Jordan River. And these 2.5 tribes had come to Moses already in the book of Numbers and said, "We've got so many herds and flocks, there won't be enough room for us there. We'd rather stay on this side." And Moses, kind of suspecting they want to get out of a fight, says, "Oh, you think you're not going to get out of a fight? I'll let you do that. God will let you do that as long as you fight the fight with the Israelites to conquer the land, and you're also at the front of the battle." And and then that's repeated in the beginning of Joshua, in the first chapter of Joshua. And so this concludes that situation because the fight is done, even though we know there were places that they didn't conquer. That's kind of the discrepancy between the edited version of the book of Joshua, and we read that ending last time we met, where everything had been done and everything had been finished, all the conquering. Well, there were plenty of stories that told us that they didn't finish. And we know that also from Judges and from whatever. In other words, there's competing truths here. But as far as this truth is concerned, okay, the people can go back now. The leadership that is the men. The women and children were already there. They can go back to their part of the land. But Joshua stresses they've got to keep the covenant with Moses. And already here is floating upwards is this interesting thing of having it both ways. having it both ways is that the land that was promised was on the west side of the Jordan River. The original land promise wasn't. This was a change in the promise. So if it's a change in the promise, is the land that they're in really part of the larger body? And although it doesn't say, and you should know you're part of the larger body, instead it says, and you should know you need to continue to keep the laws of Moses, the laws of the covenant. Because we can't think in terms of, we shouldn't think in terms of religion today, that you have the same religion regardless of where you live. Religions were a culture, a national culture that were connected to location. In most cases, of course, that changed when people were when certain leaderships were exiled from their land and they brought their culture to another place. But by and large, it seems to be this question about will they still be? I'm not going to say it'd be anachronistic for me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Are they still going to be Jewish? Are you going to still say Jewish even though you move all the way there? Now, of course, that's anachronistic because we don't call it Judaism. Are you still going to be Israelite? Are you still going to be servants of Adonai, of Yud He Vav He? And I think I'll end with that one. Are you still going to be servants of God? Because that's going to come up in the answer. I should have asked for questions or comments beforehand. Sorry. Does anybody remember where we were? It's been a long time since we've studied together. It's been a long time. I think the end of it was May. Okay, so they're about to go back. This is the war is over, so to speak, at this stage. The war is over. It's time to go and start real life. When you start real life, Joshua says, don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you come from. Don't forget you're part of something bigger, which are the people of Israel who have the God of Israel, the message of the God of Israel. Okay. Corinne, would you like to read today?
Yes, just 1 second, please. I'll download the sheet.
Okay. Do you want us to wait and call you afterwards? While you're downloading, I'll say that our prayers are with Madalena right now, who didn't open this because she's with her father at the hospital and helping to take care of him right now. She had actually thought that there would be internet in the hospital, but apparently it's not so good. But we're thinking of Jesus, Madalena's father, right now in our study. And we're
Yes.
thinking of the ongoing war, which things seem to be hopefully maybe changing a little bit. We'll see. As the negativity rises in one place, the positivity perhaps when the negativity has gone down another place. Go ahead, Corey. We're at 7 to 8.
Yes. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the
No.
Gadites.
Sorry, Corey. We're at 7 to 8. We're in the next
Oh,
section.
7 to 8, sorry. Yep. To the 1/2 tribe of Manasseh, Moses had assigned territory in Bashan, and to the other, Joshua assigned territory on the west side of the Jordan with their kindred. Furthermore, when uh, Joshua sent the 2.5 tribes off to their homes to bless them and said to them, return to your homes with great wealth, with very much livestock, with silver and gold, with copper and iron, and with a great quantity of clothing. Share the spoil of your enemies with your kin.
Yeah. Reactions?
I didn't realize that they had gotten any spoils.
Yeah, so there it's interesting, Roberta, because there were stories where they were not allowed to touch any of the spoils, but there were stories where they could touch the spoils. And in general, this verse is a little strange, which is why I said it separately, and also the ancient tradition of the Masoretic text designated this as a separate paragraph. Achituv, I had a feeling that this was a little bit exaggerated. Didn't feel like I'd heard this anywhere before, that we had heard it before. in the same way you're surprised, Roberta. And Shmuel Achituv, in his commentary that I use always to prepare, says the same thing. There's no parallel to this text exactly, with so much stuff. Here and there you have things, but it seems like it's totally exaggerated. And is that what purpose does that serve in the narrative that the author has Joshua exaggerating how much stuff they have, other than perhaps to say this was worth your while? It wasn't just that you said you would do this in breaking away and getting that other land. This was worth your while. Look how good this was for you. Yes, Richard.
Um, uh, uh, was it common to share the spoils with the enemies? I mean, you defeated them and then you share the spoils with them? I don't
No,
get.
who's they're not the enemies here. This is all part of the tribes of Israel. They're just the 2.5 tribes that had said that
But it's what is the word in Hebrew then? Because in English it says share the spoil of your
With their
enemies.
kin.
With your, I misread it. Okay, got it. Sorry.
Right. The spoil, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it was the
Yeah.
custom to say, "Oh, we just kicked your ass in war, but here, go ahead, take 25% back."
Yeah.
Sorry, I should watch my mouth. Okay.
So did they
Somehow
lose-
I feel a little sad that the people that they conquered had to lose so much of what they had accumulated. I don't know. That kind of rubs me.
Makes you feel
wrong way.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yes, makes me feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we see, and that's why we see, had we studied Joshua as we always intend, 1 week after the other and finish it in, but there's so many breaks, of course, which is reality, despite our intentions. We would see just how brutal this book is. In other words, this is nothing compared to of all the death and the slaughter and the cutting off of fingers in one of the stories and the things. This is a brutal book. And when it comes to the dividing the loot, we think in win-win situations. We think of post-World War II Europe, right? Right. It wasn't as if, okay, the Allies won and that's the end, the rest of them suffered. No, then the Allies came back, the United States came back and built up. Right. And look what, in other words, we have a totally different vision of what the world is and needs to be today. And not just a win-lose situation. We think of win-win, even if it's not 50% win-win. So I think your inclinations are definitely with the times, Roberta. But when we think of this country, in most cases, I don't know if it's 98% or if it's 99% or if it's 99.7%, the battle against the Native Americans left with Native Americans with absolutely nothing. Even if you say afterwards there's territories or whatever, you think of what they had. You think of that, and of course we're thinking, what does that mean from an Israel-Palestine point of view, or people of the world, Europe against the Jewish people point of view? Where there's always this situation, there's always this question of where are the spoils of war? Where are they? And who took what and how much did they get and how much did they keep?
How many did they lose? I mean, in this battle, maybe we read about it before the battle. Obviously, there was a battle. Did they lose a lot of their own members?
So it's good that you brought that up. Really, we don't hear there's very few reckonings of the Israelites lost. There's usually how much of the other side was lost, but there is a case where they were. That was a very specific case, and that was after Achan. It's hard to remember. This is from the very beginning of our study. Achan took some of the loot from Jericho. He took a few things and hid them under his tent, and because he did that, I don't remember what the number was, lots of Israelites died in battle. To show us that the battle, who dies in battle is not really up to their prowess, their military prowess is up to God. Right? They're just pieces on a chessboard being moved around. And because he did this wrong, he brought a curse upon the people of Israel, and they lost an enormous amount of fighters. And I mentioned that now. It's good you brought that up because that's going to come up now as well in the story.
Meanwhile, they came out ahead. We're
Right.
assuming. I don't know if that stuff makes up the loss of life, though.
Right. No, well, you have to assume that in more there's going to be, there's not an emphasis on the loss of life in the book of Joshua other than that one story, really. That the story, because when it could be explained by now, does that mean that in reality there was no loss of life? If these stories at all are real, which is a question, of course, because they seem to be romanticized, but if they are real, of course there had to be. There's no way for there to be. I mean, how many dead in the Israeli army since October 7th, even after the initial attack? Is it between
I'm
three?
sure they keep track.
But no, of course, no, it's between 300 and 400. It's already beyond the 300 mark.
And the Palestinians?
So we all,
3,000 or
well, we don't know exactly because we don't have accurate numbers. We know what Hamas tells us is, which is 35 or 36, whatever thousand. But you have, I see a lot of recordings of speakers on behalf of Israel that say, they challenge those numbers. And I always want to say, okay, let's say it's half of that. Let's say it's a quarter of that. But we do know there were women and children that are included in that. Well, it's death, it's destruction. We see the pictures. You can't tell us there's no destruction. Now you could say, well, it's justified because, okay, that's a different story. But it's always this arguing the facts. It's getting stuck on the small numbers of the facts of how many were killed. Well, of course, that matters. There's a difference between 1,000 and 30,000. But anyway, back to this. We don't hear much about the death in the book of Joshua. We hear of the land that's taken, and in this case, the spoils are taken, which seems to be exaggerated, grossly exaggerated. And then I go back to my question: why do I think maybe it was exaggerated here? It was in order for Joshua to kind of say, "You guys really got a lot out of this deal." But let's see what happens. Rita Claire, 9-12, please.
So the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh in the land of Canaan and made their way back to the land of Gilead, the land of their own holding, which they had acquired by God's command through Moses. When they came to the region of the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great conspicuous altar. A report reached the Israelites. The Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh have built an altar opposite the land of Canaan in the region of the Jordan across from the Israelites. When the Israelites heard this, the whole community of the Israelites assembled at Shiloh to make war on them.
This is a little surprising, huh? Civil war? Not one that people remember very much. So the area where this is being, first of all, what do they build?
They built an altar.
Not only an altar, conspicuous. Right, a conspicuous altar, right?
Conspicuous,
okay.
yes.
What does that mean? We don't know exactly. What do you usually use an altar for?
for
What's that, Richard?
Sacrifice?
Yeah, that's the usual thing you think about an altar. And that appears to be what they're thinking of as well. The area, it doesn't say the exact area, but the general area where this was erected was the same area where the Israelites came across at the very beginning of the book, not in the first chapter, but afterwards they came across, and where the water stood still. Remember, the water piled up on the right-hand side as they walked across, and before the battle with Jericho, it seems to be a monumental place, a place of connection to the war. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that they're doing it in that particular place to connect to those people? Or are they doing it in that place to say, opposite, on the other side of the water, say, you know what? Now we're separate. We've got our own, instead of Shiloh here, we've got our own holy place instead of Shiloh. A lot of questions here, but what's clear is that the 9.5 tribes totally understood it as an attack. Maybe not a military attack, but a spiritual, cultural, religious attack on who they were, but political, maybe. Maybe we'll stay with cultural, maybe. Yeah. A conspicuous altar. All right. So what do they do? Let's go on, Megan. On the next page. (13 to 20).
But first the Israelites sent the priest Phinehas, son of Eleazar, to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, accompanied by 10 chieftains, one chieftain from each of the tribal families of Israel, every one of them a family head among the contingents of Israel. When they came to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, they spoke to them as follows. Thus said all of God's community, what is this treachery that you have committed this day against the God of Israel, turning away from God, building yourselves an altar and rebelling this day against God? It is a sin of Peor, which brought a plague upon God's community, such a small thing to us. We have not purified ourselves from it to this very day. And now you would turn away from God? If you rebel against God today, tomorrow the divine wrath will be directed to the whole community of Israel. If it is because of the land of your holding, if it is because the land of your holding is impure, cross over into the land of God's own holding, where the tabernacle of God abides, and acquire holdings among us. But do not rebel against God, and do not rebel against us by building for yourselves an altar other than the altar of the eternal our God. When Achan, son of Zerah, violated the prescription, anger struck the whole community of Israel. He was not the only one who perished for that sin.
Okay. So Achan, son of Zerach, is the story I was referring to, Roberta, when they're after what he did, even though he was a single person, there were huge numbers of casualties. That's one story that's mentioned here by Pinchas and the 10 representatives. The other story that's mentioned is the story of Baal Peor, which is also in the book of Numbers. And interestingly enough, the person who saves the day is this Pinchas's. Well, is it the same one or is it one who has the same name? It's hard to know. I guess it's the same one. It's the same. It's in this narrative is the same one. It's a story where the Midianite women came to seduce the Israelite men, and one of the women is having cultic sex with one of the Israelite men, and in the center of the camp, and comes Pinchas and then shish kebabs them, stabs both of them with his sword or with his staff, his javelin or whatever, his spear. And because of that story, there were multiple deaths that God brought about a plague. In other words, two stories are brought here. Two stories in which individuals, small group, acted, and yet the implications were for everybody else. So from a rhetorical point of view, what Pinchas is saying, how dare you do this? You set up this alternative temple. I'm using the word on purpose, temple, even though it was an altar. This alternative temple, and that's going to compete with us. You're going back on your own God. This is blasphemy. So, I mean, and then rhetorically says, and there's stories that we know. It's still that's a blemish on our history, and that impure. And also, he insinuates that the land outside of the on the other side of the river is impure. It's an impure land. It's not a pure land. There's all these are all new kinds of things. But what's really going on here? How do we understand this reaction of Pinchas here to what they actually did?
Why did they build another altar?
Right, because but what does Pinchas assume? What is
There's
that?
only one. There's only one.
There can only be one, right? Which is an interesting thing to say because that's more something that we usually attribute to the book of Deuteronomy, to Devarim. Achitu points out verses in Leviticus as well, that there could be only one place. But in reality, of course, we know there were multiple temples before the building of the one temple. In not only that, before the centrality of the cult happened generations after Solomon built the first temple, that the temple in Jerusalem. But aside from that, even the inner logic of the situation, he's angry at them for rebelling against God. All they did was build an altar, right? So the assumption is they're going to use that altar as a major center for religious competition. What else could it mean? I mean, it feels like there's a bit of an overreaction. But now, luckily, they didn't just go to war. The people wanted to go to war, but they sent this mishlachat, what do you call this? Delegation. They wanted to parley. They sent this delegation first to see what the story was. I guess to convince them to tear it down. Well, anything else interesting or different in this? It's a long, complicated section, I understand.
Divine wrath.
Yeah. Yeah, and not only you're going to, and what he's saying by mentioning those two stories of Achan and Baal Peor, it's not just you're going to be in trouble, we're all going to be in trouble because of you. You're messing it up for all of us.
The sins of one are visited upon all.
Yes, yeah.
Well, that's certainly a way of taking control.
Well, it does seem a little bit controlling, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very much to me.
Well, a little bossy.
Yeah, they want power is going to be on the Israelite side.
Right.
The 10 tribes are telling the other 2.5, you have to submit to our political authority.
Right, but what you would have thought was kind of given. If they're part of the people, Joshua was the leader. He sent them forth, but don't forget the traditions of Moses, of God, and then they build this, and of course, all right. That we see how the Israelites, the other tribes, understood this. Let's see how they defend themselves. Richard, why don't you go 21-29?
The Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the contingents of Israel. They said, God, the eternal God, surely knows, Israel too shall know. If we acted in rebellion or in treachery against God, do not vindicate us this day. If we built an altar to turn away from God, it was to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings upon it. The only thing out of our concern that in time to come, your children might say to our children, what have you to do with the eternal, the God of Israel? God made the Jordan a boundary between you and us, O Reubenites and Gadites. You have no share in God. Thus, your children might prevent our children from worshiping God. So we decided to provide.
Hold on, put your finger where the so is.
Uh-huh.
What they said is that if we had done this, meaning, first of all, they start with, oh, eternal God, even twice. Of course, we believe in God. Of course, we're part of we're part of it. If we had done this in order to offer sacrifices, to make offerings, and to educate our kids in saying, we've got to do this because they're not letting us come over anymore, right? We're outsiders. We crossed over to the other side of the territory. We're not bona fide Israelites. We're second class. If we had done all this, right, and said to our children, right, what do you have to do with the eternal God? Okay, but we're sorry. If we did this, thus your children might prevent our children from worshiping God. So we decided to provide. Go ahead. So
we decided to provide a witness for ourselves by building an altar, not for burnt offerings or other sacrifices, but as a witness between you and us and between the generations to come, that we may perform the service of God at Shiloh with our burnt offerings, our sacrifices, and our offerings of well-being, and that your children should not say to our children in time to come, you have no share in God. We reason, should they speak thus to us and to our children in time to come, we would reply, see the replica of God's altar, which our fathers made, not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but as a witness between you and us. Far be it from us to rebel against God or to turn away this day from God and build an altar for burnt offerings, grain offerings, and sacrifices other than the altar of the eternal our God that stands before the tabernacle.
So a little bit long and complicated, but basically, oh, you thought this was rebelling against you and God by offering sacrifices? No, you misunderstood. This isn't an altar for sacrifices. This is an educational altar. This is symbolic altar. And I will add in parentheses, this is the kind of altar that nobody ever saw before, but it seems to be talking about something that was erected in the past. And we could go back to those stories and see maybe what it was referring to, although I'm not
Kind
sure.
of like a diorama at the Natural History Museum.
Yeah, or like building a model of a synagogue that you don't pray in, but that's the one we had in Jenemsveld in Eastern Europe. Here's the synagogue that we don't pray. No, that's not a good analogy either. But
I think maybe it's kind of like a World's Fair exposition, showing the what it's like over in the far off land. This is what they do.
Yeah. Or yeah. And this is what they do, and we're connected to that.
Right.
But it's more than that. It's in a place of connection. It's a place of the border. It's there. What they're claiming is, no, instead of this driving us apart, this is attaching us together. This is strengthening the bond between us. Of course, we're only going to, they say, of course, we're only going to offer those sacrifices at Shiloh. That's the only place we will. But in order for our children to continue to understand that we have a relationship with you folks on the other side of the river, we needed to do, this will be a place, I'm adding now, a place where we're going to tell the stories. It's kind of like, this is where we're going to do the Seder, right? This is where we're going to bring, and the language here is reminiscent of the Seder, I think, of the commandment to tell your children of the Exodus story. It's an interesting thing. One might ask, did they only think up this to get out of it because they were really going to offer sacrifices? That's the cynic in me. Or is this a really good example of how one set of people do one thing, another set of people instantly understand that as a threat and come in a warlike position, needing to show their dominance, and then are told, no, you totally misunderstood. That's not what this is for. Right. So I think the second way I told the story is how it's intended here, of course, and not that this was a ploy to get out of some mistake that they made, right? They thought it through. Where the mistake is, of course, we would say in the modern world, is that they didn't tell them. There was no communication. Had they told them, we're going to erect this altar to be like this, would have sent them a scroll or something, this could have been avoided. That would be my sermon here, right? The sermon would be, there would be better communication between people, families, organizations, nations. But communication, opening up the lines of communication can really avoid a lot of issues, right? Comments or reactions?
You have no share in God. That's sort of interesting.
Yeah. Because in this language, the people are God's inheritance, so to speak. I think. All right, why don't we go on to the end? Sue, you want to read 30, 34 for us? Okay, need you to unmute first.
When the priest Phinehas and the chieftains of the community, the heads of the contingents of Israel, who were with him, heard the explanation given by the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the Manassites, they approved. The priest Phinehas, son of Eleazar, said to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the Manassites, now we know that God is in our midst. Since you have not committed such treachery against God, you have indeed saved the Israelites from punishment by God. Then the priest Phinehas, son of Eleazar, and the chieftains returned from the Reubenites and the Gadites and the land of Gilead to the Israelites in the land of Canaan, and gave them their report. The Israelites were pleased, and the Israelites praised God, and they spoke no more of going to war against them, to ravage the land in which the Reubenites and the Gadites dwell. The Reubenites and the Gadites named the altar Witness, meaning it is a witness between us and them, and the eternal God is our God.
The end of the text is a little bit problematic. At least the version we have, in the same version in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation, basically says at the end, the Reubenites and the Gadites, let me go translate directly. Yeah, the last verse is V'yikra'u b'nei Reuven u'b'nei Gad, and the Reubenites and the Gadites. Interesting, the half of tribe Manasseh is left out, but that doesn't bother us so much. Lemizbeach, they named the altar, and then it says they named the altar because it was a witness between us, the people, and God. What we're missing from the text missing from the text is, what did they name the altar? So here in the English translation, in brackets, they put, we name the altar Witness, meaning it is a witness between. Rashi medieval rabbinic commentator Rashi usually wouldn't say that a word is missing from the text, but in this case he does. He says there's a word missing, and the word is edim. In other words, the word is aid, the word is witness. As if Rashi's admitting that this text, when it was copied by an earlier copier, his eye jumped from one word to another and left out that word. It could be other commentators, more modern, would say there was a longer name, perhaps it just wasn't recorded here. But this last verse is very awkward if you don't add what the name was. And the shortest way, the simplest way to add what the name was, is to see what the explanation was. It could have been named something else, and the interpretation was witness. That's not all that important. But yeah, so it's like all's well that ends well, kind of, right? Any war was avoided. Yeah, I'm low on energy, so I guess I'm projecting energy.
For the peaceful people, it was an awful lot of turmoil.
Of course, it was a lot of stress. I mean, the story is built up well. It's long-winded, kind of, and maybe it would have been easier if I broke it down into smaller sections. But it's not a bad story. For me, it's a great story of misinterpretation, of misreading the other group, of creating an enemy when there is none. That's kind of my takeaway from this. It's also an interesting educational well. How do we keep the message alive for the generations to come? It's what we do. Richard, you mentioned before, like different things. What's a Holocaust museum, right? You know, what is it? Holocaust museum, more than anything else, there's like every city has its own Holocaust museum. It's like we can never forget this. This is something we can never forget. especially now that the survivors are so few.
I'm with the rabbi.
Anything else?
I was going to say, I don't see any problem with leaving a word out. And that if you read that sentence, it says the Reubenites and the Gadites named the altar, meaning witness between us. Meaning they didn't put, you could leave the name out. It's just an unknown name, but we know what the meaning of the name is.
Okay, but I think it's considered to be awkward in the Hebrew itself.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Where that's I hear what you're saying. And if I looked a little bit more, if I spent more time, perhaps I'd find some other. It's the only other thing I saw was somebody started the introduction to this whole section, Sojin, I think, in his commentary. We learn of an altar that we don't know the name of. This monumental altar. There's something this echoes. It echoes a little bit. This it's not an altar, but it's a pile of stones that Jacob erects after he makes a deal with Lavan, Yaakovim Lavan, his father-in-law. And it's the only two words in Aramaic in the Torah. And Gal Sa'aduta.
Grilled cheese sandwich.
Maybe it's Gal Sa'aduta. And anyway, it has to do with there's a pile of stones which uses the word in Aramaic that would be witness here. And it seems to be, and I think there's parallels, of course, in the ancient Near Eastern thing. You leave a monument or something. So, what is maybe it's a kind of a monument. Maybe there's a monument someplace in the world that is in between territories of two people that were warring or were together in war, were allies. I don't know. I'm sure there's a good analogy here. But as you can hear, I'm out of gas. I'm sorry. I'm not feeling well this week. Still hope to be at Kabbalat Shabbat Friday evening. And we've got we won't have the microphone. He's not coming.
Go lay down, take some pills.
Oh, yeah. If only this is a viral thing I get every year.
Oh,
Chicken soup.
If only we ate chicken, right?
If only you would eat chicken, that's right. That's right.
We don't
You know
have
what? I was going to say, I couldn't help but think of the war that we're having in this country against the Democrats and the Republicans. Here we both want what's best for this country, and yet we're fighting each other. I couldn't help it. It just came into my head.
Right. The analogy there would be, is one side, either side, assuming the worst about the other side when that was not the intention. Right? Does everything, I see that in the circles that I'm close to, very much side of, you'll say, well, look what so-and-so said, who's on the other side. Oh, but that's not what they meant. What they meant was there's this constant second guessing, this constant reinterpretation. So yeah, of course, we're going to see those more and more. But remember my advice on Shabbat, right? Watch the news during the week. It comes time when you light your candles, Shabbat candles, no CNN, no Fox, no MSNBC for those 25 hours. That's my advice. My Shabbat.
I didn't watch it at all yesterday, quite honestly. It's gotten to that point for me.
Okay, so good. You're being overly zealous. You're going to take it into every day. Not every day will be.
well, it's depressing.
It's very depressing.
Of course it is. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the chicken soup. Rita Claire,
Yes.
we don't even have any fleshik pot, so I can't even make it. Don't even know.
We'll bring it to you in a plastic.
Oh,
Well, you can use, there is a vegetarian stuff to make soup.
Oh yes, Sasha uses it, but it
Yeah.
has MSG in it. The
Oh,
there is natural
Oh.
stuff. We could go.
no MSG.
At the health food store, there's probably, but the stuff that she likes, osam, the Israeli,
Awesome, yes.
she loves that stuff, and she loves it herself. But I'm not. MSG doesn't. I don't feel well after that. So other soups do help. I mean, it's interesting. I'm not going to go into that. We're still recording. But I drink tea, I drink, and in the evening I drink something else that totally calms it down. But I wait until 6 o'clock for that. Okay, friends, be well. I'll see you.
You too.
Rabbi, it's 6 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, I
There
know.
you go.
And no class tomorrow, okay? For those that are celebrating
class
4th of
tomorrow,
July, may
okay.
it be a good celebration. May it be one of not just eating hot dogs and watching fireworks, but thinking about the history of this nation and what we're doing this year to make it better. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Feel better.
Feel better.
Yes,
Right.
Thank you.